Hey guys, Heidi Preep here. I am here today to do a bit of a monster of a video, I think. I just kind of like feel it in my bones that it's going to be a long one, about a topic that ENFPs want to know about constantly, which is ENFPs and productivity. So I have a lot of thoughts on this. Where do we start? So because there was a time period where basically I was writing like 3 articles a day on MBTI, and I also wrote, I think, like 5 books in the span of 2 years, I'm frequently accused in the MBTI community of having abnormally strong extroverted thinking for an ENFP. And if you don't know what I mean when I say extroverted thinking, I'm talking about cognitive functions. So your brain as an ENFP is made up of extroverted intuition, introverted feeling, extroverted thinking, and introverted sensing. And extroverted thinking is the function that we stereotypically associate with being really organized and getting a lot of stuff done. It really helps us set goals and work consistently towards them. And here's the thing, as much as I would love to say that I have an abnormal amount of TE as an ENFP, I really don't think that's true. I think that the secret to being hyper productive as an ENFP is working with yourself holistically. So taking into account the fact that you are not an ESTJ or an ENTJ, and hyper structuring your life is actually probably going to work against you rather than with you, because it's going to block your natural creative flow. So in this video, I'm not going to be talking about how to hyper structure your life in a way that's going to make you kind of die inside while you're producing work. I'm going to talk more about how to keep your mind and body and spirit open to new ideas and new experiences and new opportunities, because that's going to be what makes you want to produce, okay? Nobody has a motivation problem. I really deeply, to the core of myself, believe that. There's no such thing as an unmotivated person. There's only people whose life conditions do not match their natural sense of motivation. So this video is more about designing your life conditions so that your natural sense of creativity and motivation will flow out of you without you having to be super strict with yourself in a way that feels really constraining. So we're actually gonna go over each of the 4 cognitive functions and what each one of them needs in order to find the balance between absolute chaos and extreme rigidity. Because in the middle of that is this beautiful flow state where you can produce really wonderful work. So in this video, I'm gonna assume that you have some sort of flexibility over your calendar. So if you work a job where every minute of your life is super scheduled, a lot of this advice might not work that well, or you might not be able to take it. But assuming that you have some sort of autonomy over how you structure your time, this video is gonna give you some tools for how you can use that time effectively. So let's start with extroverted intuition, or NE. I could take up a career in film. Cameras are an excellent metaphor for the passage of time. I could be an astrophysicist. Sure are a lot of conspiracy theories out there about Stephen Hawking. How about that snack? NE is the part of your brain that naturally cross-contextualizes information and likes to look at things through a theoretical lens. Extroverted intuition is the water that you swim in as an ENFP, and if that water is polluted, then you're not going to have a healthy outcome. And if that water is clean and filtered and optimized for your life conditions, you're going to find it a lot easier to be creative and productive. So having healthy extroverted intuition, even though I just compared it to like an ocean, now we're going to switch gears and talk about it like it's a farm. So if you study farming for like 3 seconds, which I assume many of you have because you're people with diverse interests, you'll quickly find out that biodiversity is really important for growing healthy crops. So the more organisms that you have contributing to one plot of land, the better your crops are ultimately going to grow and the healthier crops you're going to produce. And the same is true of your brain as an ENFP or an ENTP. Because our brain naturally likes to cross-contextualize information, the first thing that you need to do is make sure you are feeding your brain a biodiverse range of information. If you are feeling slow and unproductive and unmotivated, it's probably not because you have an output issue, it's because you have an input issue, okay? If you're not watering your soils, if you're not keeping your farmland alive, there's gonna be nothing growing there. You need to look at the conditions that you're putting your mind in. So, are you doing a lot of reading on different interests? Are you talking to a range of different people? Are you engaging with a lot of novelty? Are you switching things up regularly in your life? All of these practices of bringing new ideas into our awareness is what ultimately leads to those aha moments for us as ENFPs, where we figure something out that before felt kind of hazy and difficult to reach. Healthy extroverted intuition literally just means taking a whole bunch of different thoughts that are maybe slightly related but slightly different, throwing them all in your brain, letting them mix and mingle in there for a while, until those thoughts start figuring out for themselves, oh, I'm kind of similar to this thought, but not so similar to this thought. What's the differences and similarities? That is the cross-contextual thinking that your brain naturally thrives on. It loves to figure out what's the same, what's different, and then it can isolate different variables to figure out like, this is my one pearl of wisdom, right? This is the thing that's like this, but not like this. And once you arrive at that pearl of wisdom and understanding, you're going to be naturally motivated to draw upon it, to share it, to do more research on it. But first, you have to give yourself a biodiverse range of information in order to grow that beautiful crop out of. If you're not feeding your brain, you're not going to produce anything good. 99% of the time when I'm feeling really unproductive and I'm really struggling, it's because I'm not learning anything. Trying to be productive as an ENFP, if you're not actively engaged in ongoing education, is exactly like trying to grow farm crops without any rain or any soil. It's just not going to work because the conditions are not right for it. You wouldn't beat up a tomato plant for not growing if it wasn't being watered or it didn't have the proper conditions to foster in. You would just change its environment. And the same is true for you and your brain. If you're not producing, if you're not thriving, if you're not meeting your full potential, look at your environment. Ask yourself what you're putting into your mind before you get down on yourself for what you're pulling out of it. Okay? If your brain isn't growing vegetables, it's probably not because you're lazy. You probably just need to give your brain crops some water. The number 2 tip that I would give for ENFPs who want to become more productive is actually one that comes from the Comprehensive ENFP Survival Guide, but not one that I wrote. So when I was writing this book, let me grab it actually, one sec. So when I was writing this book in like 2015 or whatever, I sent out a survey and asked ENFPs what advice they would give to other ENFPs and then put a bunch of that advice in the book. And one thing that someone said was, still to this day, one of the best pieces of advice I've heard for productivity as an ENFP. So I'm gonna find it and read it to you guys. Okay, so this person wrote, "The reason you can't plan an essay the way others do isn't because your mind goes blank, but because it thinks of too much at once and explodes in all directions. Get a sheet of paper or a blank screen and write down all of it, even the stupid stuff that seems completely irrelevant. It's far easier to rearrange from something than from nothing. Start in the middle, work backwards, forwards, and sideways, because if you try to start at the beginning, you'll never get any work done at all." And I think that is seriously one of the best pieces of advice I have ever heard, because what they're suggesting you do is start from your extroverted intuition. So start from that part of yourself that feels naturally energized and work with the big ideas first. Then afterwards, find the structure for those ideas. It's easier to tame a fire than it is to try to spark one that isn't there. Start with what you feel really excited about pursuing and then work backwards from there. And we're gonna talk a little bit about that when we get to the TE section of this video. But for now, I think that it's really important to note that you have to honor your natural process. As soon as you feel compelled to start working on something because you get that surge of excitement, don't wait until you have all the steps in order. Start there and then try to tame the fire afterwards. It's gonna be a lot more manageable because you're gonna already have something to work with. If you try to start at the beginning, you're gonna be doing a lot of detail-oriented work that's gonna cause you to lose steam before you ever get to that burst of inspiration. I have been centralizing my work philosophy around this particular piece of advice for 5 years now, and I promise you, it is much, much, much better than trying to do things the traditional SJ way. It's the way that works for you, and that kind of makes it your superpower, so own it. Okay, so the last piece of extroverted intuition advice that I'm gonna give is one that I see in a lot of books on productivity and I think is particularly applicable for people who have an extroverted intuition or extroverted sensing dominant function, is learn to productively procrastinate. So the big problem with procrastination is that it often comes paired with a lot of shame, and shame is a very inhibiting emotion, right? And we're gonna talk a lot more in a minute about how our emotional experience impacts our ability to be productive. But what shame activates in us is this feeling of like, ooh, I wanna shrink down inside of myself and hide from the world. And that is the opposite of productive energy, right? One of the most valuable things I think you can do as an ENFP, and we're gonna talk again more about this as we get to the SI section, is start to develop some mindfulness around when it's just not a good time for you to focus on the thing that you're trying to focus on, and choose something else to do instead. So rather than sitting in front of a computer screen for 3 hours trying to write, if you're feeling full of anxiety and you just don't feel like you have writing in you at that point in time, get up, clean your kitchen, do something that takes your mind in a different direction, but that puts you in motion somehow. Action begets action, okay? It's an upward spiral. But inaction and stress and shame begets inaction and stress and shame. So the more that you sit there and beat yourself up over what you're not doing, the more you're encouraging yourself to continue not doing anything. Versus if you are to call a spade, tell yourself, I'm not focused on this right now. My NE wants to think about or explore something else. Pick something that's going to put you in motion, that's going to start some sort of upward spiral where you start to feel like, oh, I could be productive even if it's in this other department. I once wrote an entire course when I was procrastinating writing something else. And guess what? That course ended up becoming a lot more useful in my life than the other thing that I was trying to do in the first place. And the important piece here is just try to pick something that isn't like dicking off and watching TV, right? Pick something that's going to make you feel good about yourself. So whether that's exercising, whether that's cleaning, or even just calling a friend and talking through any anxiety or resistance you're feeling towards the work that you're supposed to be doing, is going to go a much longer way than sitting there beating yourself up for hours because you're not getting the work that you want to get done. Just take some small action in some area and it's going to put your brain in motion. It's going to kick you into the gear you need to be kicked into in order to start working effectively. All right, time to talk about your next cognitive function, which is introverted feeling. Hey, FI. Oh, sorry, I didn't see you there. Jeez. What were you doing? You're supposed to be answering emails. I was having a fantasy about how misunderstood I am, obviously. I also forget where this quote comes from, so forgive me. It might be a Gabor Mate quote. It just kind of feels like the kind of thing he'd say. But I remember reading somewhere this line that was like, most people who think that they have a time management problem actually have an emotion management problem. And I was like, oh no. Yep, that's it. And I'm going to say, I don't think that all ENFPs struggle with emotional regulation. I think a lot of ENFPs have very healthy relationships to their FI where they're able to deal with emotions authentically as they come up. They're able to address them. They're able to be compassionate towards themselves. They have a secure attachment. But I think that the Venn diagram of ENFPs who really, really struggle with productivity and ENFPs who have emotional regulation issues kind of looks like this. I really think that it is more often than not anxiety, negative self-talk, perfectionism, inner critic, and self-esteem or worthiness issues that are the main components of what gets in our way when it comes to doing work. Now, this could be untrue if, let's say, you're dealing with something like attention deficit disorder where you really, really have trouble sequencing your actions and with gauging how much time things take, etc., etc. By the way, if you do have ADHD or you think you might have it, I really recommend the book Scattered Minds by Gabor Mate. I'm reading it right now, and it is a fascinating perspective on ADHD. Also, if you're not an ENFP and you have ADHD or know someone or love someone who has it, it's just a really, really cool perspective on how attachment and trauma and early childhood experiences play into the later development of ADHD and how ADHD can be managed in a more holistic way. Anyway, I don't have ADHD. I just feel the need to disclose that because I want to acknowledge that that could be an additional layer of challenge that you're dealing with on top of kind of ENFP specific concentration issues. But even without it, I really think that for myself, the main thing that gets in my own way is all of those things I just mentioned. It's often not that I don't know what work needs to be done. It's that I'm distracted by thoughts or negative emotions that I'm having, and those things are demanding my attention. So the best strategy I've ever come up with as a self-employed person is baking self-care into my workday and making it non-negotiable. I remember reading one time, if you don't have time to exercise, you don't have time to do your workday. And I really, really ascribe to that philosophy. Every single day, I do an hour to an hour and a half of exercise before sitting down to work. And if I do not do that, my productivity is insanely lower. Exercise boosts endorphin levels. Endorphin levels help with concentration. For other people, it's meditating first thing in the morning that helps. For other people, it's calling someone and just having some social interaction that helps. But you have to look at your emotional well-being as an absolute core component of your work life and your ability to produce if you ever want to produce consistently. Okay, if you wait until you're feeling good to produce good work, it's probably gonna work. You're gonna work in extreme bursts and flops, and that's fine. For some people that works, and you can live your whole life like that, and that's totally cool. I really, really encourage you to do whatever works for you. But if you have any sort of job where you need a consistent level of output, you have to pay extreme attention to what you need for self-care, and you have to make it a part of your workday. So I'm not allowed to sign off for the day until I've done an hour and a half of exercise. I'm not allowed to sign off for the day until I've journaled and checked in with my inner child. And it sounds ridiculous, but when I tell you that this allows me to consistently produce in a way that absolutely nothing else does. I promise you I am not lying. You are a complex system in and of yourself, right? Just like a company has to manage the emotions and circumstances of all of its employees, you have to manage the emotions and circumstances of your inner world in order to create a smooth and comfortable working environment where you're not constantly distracted by racing thoughts that you haven't dealt with. You might need to get therapy. You might need to do years of trauma work before you can sit down and focus for hours at a time without interruption. That's fine. Develop an awareness of that. And don't minimize your emotional experience and tell it you shouldn't be showing up because I'm trying to concentrate. It's like a little child. It's gonna keep tugging on your sleeve until you give it attention. And believe me, once you've listened to it and integrated it, it will leave you alone for long enough to get stuff done. Next tip for integrating introverted feeling into your workday. So if you've been in the personality world for a little while, you've probably heard about the study that the Quiet Institute came out with, where they talked about how extroverts favor the neurotransmitter dopamine in their brain. Introverts tend to favor the neurotransmitter acetylcholine, which is the chief neurotransmitter of your parasympathetic nervous system, otherwise known as your kind of power down or rest and digest system. And what acetylcholine specializes in is memory, concentration, focus, being able to kind of blur out your environment and really deeply hone in on one thing at a time. And absolutely every single extrovert and every single introvert uses both of these neurotransmitters constantly, frequently, all the time. Dopamine is the chemical in our brain that causes us to anticipate environmental rewards and go after them. As an ENFP, you are naturally very good at that, but we might be a little more inclined as extroverts to get distracted by those kind of dopamine rewards and to not spend as much time in that kind of deeply focused flow state. But a lot of the time, that's the state we need to be in order to produce work. So what you need to do is find ways to start getting that acetylcholine flowing through your body before you start working. So what a lot of us do is we sit down to work and we're feeling scattered and our mind's in a million different directions and we're like, okay, now it's time to focus. It's already too late by that point, okay? Your mind already doesn't want to work. It's already firing in a million different directions. What you need to do is find a way to focus your attention before you sit down to work. So this means finding a non-intimidating way to kind of hypnotize yourself a little bit and put yourself in a flow state. Figure out what holds your attention naturally. So for me, every single morning, I go for a long walk and I listen to an audiobook. That naturally focuses my attention in on one thing. I'm listening to the author's voice and trying to make sense of what they're saying. And by the time I sit down to work, I'm in a deeply focused state because I took something that captured my attention and I allowed it to put me into that mode where I'm focused, I'm digesting information, I'm trying to remember what I've learned, and now I'm showing up to my workday with my system already wired towards focused attention. So I don't know what it's going to be for you that puts you in that deeply focused state, but it has to be something that you like doing, okay? It's kind of like when you crush up a pill and put it in your dog's dog food. You have to do that with your own concentration. Like find an activity that you really enjoy that helps you keep your focus, and then just kind of slide your transition into the workday into there before your brain really notices what's happening. Maybe it's sitting down and watching a TED Talk every morning. Maybe it's doing morning pages, which is a technique that a book called The Artist's Way suggests for writers. It's basically just sitting down every morning and writing for a set period of time or for a set number of pages and just letting your brain work out whatever it needs to work out in those pages in a completely unstructured way. And the idea is it helps you focus your attention in. Focusing your attention before it needs to be focused is the perfect way to acclimatize yourself to the workday without going into shock because you're trying to switch from a scattered mode into a deeply focused one. Do yourself a favor and do that in a way that you like so that it doesn't feel like a chore to focus when you have to. It feels like a natural extension of the energy that you're already in. Okay, here's the one we've all been waiting for, extroverted thinking. All right, it is 9:01 a.m. and we have already showered, gotten through our to-do list, gotten settled into a workflow. It may even be time for me to take a rest and let some of the other functions work. T, look at me, T. Okay, Annie, I'm looking. What do you want? 2 words. I have a feeling this is gonna upset the workflow. Extroverted thinking is the part of your brain that does like to organize, set goals, put things in a logical sequence, achieve, right? And this is definitely a function that we do have to harness to an extent if we want to be producing any sort of work in a way that is consistent. First piece of advice I'm going to give about TE is just something that works really well for me personally. So I am, before all else, an author, and right now I'm currently writing a book. And the number one thing that I have found keeps me sane when I'm taking on a large project like that is having a very specific structure for what I'm going to do so that I don't have to worry about the steps. Trying to create anything without structure is like trying to get water to flow into the ocean without having a river bend to direct it. It's just going to scatter everywhere and seep into the ground. And that's what your attention is going to do if you don't have structure for that attention to flow inside of. Every time I sit down to write a book chapter, I start with what is the question that this chapter is asking and what answer am I leading people to? And then I look at the logical sequence of thoughts that might eventually lead to that answer. And I write those down as subtitles. And then I'll go through and think about how many paragraphs approximately I want to put under each subtitle. And I'll write out the theme of each paragraph. This paragraph is introducing the idea. This paragraph is giving some examples of the idea. This paragraph is explaining the limits of the idea and naturally flowing into the next section. If I did not do that, I would have 0 books written. I'm 100% sure of that. Extroverted intuition will run wild and try to write a single book that covers every topic on earth if we do not give our ideas very specific boundaries to flow within. And then you can get creative with the content and you can change and redirect the river flow as much as you need to once you get going. But first you have to give yourself a little bit of a structure to stay within, or else you're just going to get overwhelmed by the storm that is your mind, okay? We need to give that water somewhere to go. So with any big project that you're taking on, it's the oldest advice in the book, but you have to break it down into small, manageable chunks, and you have to start with the structure. And again, if you find the structure isn't working later on, that's totally fine, but it's easier to switch from strategy A to strategy B than it is to try to take the entire alphabet and organize it all at once. Start with the end goal. What question are you answering? Find the structure that supports that end goal, and then let your creative energy come in at that point. And a good time to do this might be immediately after you've done that kind of extroverted intuition thought dump, right? So if you already took the start in the middle advice, that's perfect. Sit down, write out all your thoughts, begin with where you're excited, and then look at what you have and go, okay, where do I need to implement structure to now further direct this and get the idea or concept kind of tightened up? And the more you get in the practice of doing that, the easier it will be to start setting that structure up from the get-go. Now, the next piece of advice comes from Atomic Habits, which I think I've referenced in several videos now. It's just such a good book for ENFPs because it's basically the study of introverted sensing for people who don't really like introverted sensing. That's us. But there's a part of this book, Atomic Habits by James Clear, where he says that a big problem with productivity is not that we don't know what we'll do, it's that we don't know when we'll do it. So they've done all of these studies where, for example, there'll be 2 groups of people who really want to start working out. And one group will just repeat to themselves positive affirmations of, I'm going to work out, I'm going to get a lot of exercising done this week. The other group will write out and submit a plan of exactly when and for how long they're going to exercise. And that group is significantly more likely to actually do the exercise because they took this idea of what they wanted to do, and that could be exercise, it could be a work project, it could be anything that you want to get done, and it takes it from the realm of fun fantasy I'm having somewhere out there and brings it down and grounds it in the reality of your actual life. As ENFPs, we have a very big problem with living in reality. We love to live in our minds, we love to swim in ideas and possibilities, and we are not naturally great at making those theoretical possibilities a reality that we're actually engaging with. And this strategy of just telling yourself when exactly you're going to do something and what the first step is going to be will be monstrously helpful in setting a workday up for yourself. So often the problem is that we have this grand idea of maybe something we'd like to do, and we have that FI emotional fantasy of how it's going to feel when we're doing that thing, but we don't have a real life reality plan of when we're going to do that thing and what the first steps are going to be. And when I say first steps, I really mean first steps. I don't mean planning out the first chapter of your book. I mean putting on comfortable clothes to write in and sitting down at your desk and opening your computer, okay? We often think of the first step as the first thing we're gonna do when we're already producing or when we're already working towards our goal, but the first step is the thing that puts us in motion. The way that I discovered to force myself to weight train 3 times a week, I have like a home gym that I set up during COVID, and I was having a really hard time consistently exercising because I would just tell myself, I'm gonna exercise tomorrow. And it would be 2 o'clock and I'd be like, oh, I'll exercise before dinner. And then it would be 6 o'clock and I'd be like, ooh, now it's getting a bit late. I really want to eat, I'll exercise after dinner. And then after dinner, all of a sudden it would be 9:30 because I like to make really complicated meals. and then I'd be too tired and I'd be like, okay, I'll exercise tomorrow. And I would do this day after day after day. And then I discovered a hack, which is if I do not let myself eat dinner until I exercise, I will absolutely exercise. So I really like to slow roast vegetables. My favorite thing to do is just leave veggies in the oven for like an hour with a bunch of spices and let them really seep in. And I discovered if I create a sequence for myself where I take my veggies, spice them all up, put them in the oven, and put a 1-hour timer on my phone, because that's when the veggies will be done, and tell myself you can't eat until you've worked out, I will absolutely work out in that hour. Because now there's a sequence in my mind. I want to do a 55-minute workout. If I have 1 hour before my dinner is ready, because I don't want to eat a cold dinner, that means I have 5 minutes to go put on my gym clothes, pick up my weights, and start doing my exercise. So now there's a very clear sequence in my head. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, sometime between 6 and 8 p.m., I do a 1-hour workout, and I know it's time to work out when I close the oven door. That's my first step in my sequence. Oven door closes, I put my timer on, 5 minutes to get to my room, put on my workout clothes, come back out to the living room, 55 minutes to exercise, timer goes off, carrots are ready, time to eat. The first step is not picking up the weight. The first step is putting salt on the carrots. It's a sequence that has time constraints around it that sets a series of events in motion. So you have to figure out your sequence that sets your series of events in motion in order to start any sort of routine. Okay, the first step is not you doing the action, it's you preparing to do the action. That part is really, really, really important. So figure out what that inciting incident is for you and then find a way to recreate it. Every month or two, I have a day where I just wake up and I know in my bones I'm gonna write all day. And the way I know it in my bones is because I wake up and I don't want to check my phone, I open my laptop and immediately start writing. And I know every day that I wake up and start writing when I'm already in bed is gonna be a day where I am so immersed in my work that the outside world just fades away. And so now if I really need to recreate that situation, because let's say I have a deadline coming up, I know that I can wake up, not check my phone, open my laptop, and I'm creating the conditions that trigger my brain to think, oh, today's a writing day, right? So this can start with you reverse engineering what you naturally do to get yourself focused, motivated, productive. Figure out what thought puts your brain in that mode, and then create it artificially so that you can replicate it when you need to. And this brings me to our last cognitive function, introverted sensing. Listen, Annie, while you were protesting elephant cruelty in Thailand because a stranger at a bar told you to go there, I just took the liberty of going through your history and drawing up a few graphs that I thought might help us both understand how to move you a little closer to your wellness goals. So introverted sensing is our inferior function, which means we don't have as good of a grasp on it naturally as our dominant NE or FI, even our TE, which is kind of like this proud kid that likes to show off. Introverted sensing is difficult for us, but it gets less difficult when we accept that we're never going to use it the way an SJ who highly values it is going to use it. So I was raised in an SJ family. Everyone except my sister, who's an ISTP, was an SJ in my family. And they had very logical sequences for planning everything. They were very detail-oriented people. And I learned very quickly that trying to plan my future with SI is a disaster. If I try to make a slow, consistent plan that brings me towards my goals, I will want to stab my eyeballs out like 5 minutes in, and I will absolutely not finish that plan. I might start, get super depressed, beat myself up, and stop, but that's like the best it's ever gonna be if I try to plan my future in a solely SI way. But what your SI naturally loves to do as an ENFP is reflect on the past, okay? So we're gonna start capitalizing on that. Don't try to plan your workday with SI. Do try to use SI as a tool for mindfulness, because your brain already naturally does that. I talked a little bit about this in my video about feeling stuck as an ENFP, but one of the best things you can possibly do is start to create neutral reviews of yourself. And all that means is checking in with yourself on a regular basis. I do it at the end of every night and going, okay, what worked really well today and what didn't work so well? And there are a lot of different ways you could structure this exercise depending on what you're looking for. There's a period of my own life when I was in university when I was really unhappy and really unmotivated, but I couldn't really figure out why. So what I did was every single day, I sat down at the end of the day and I wrote out hour by hour what I was doing over the course of the day. And I had a color coding system where I highlighted how I felt at every hour of the day. So like yellow was really happy, pink was kind of medium, red was like, ooh, I feel really bad, really stressed out, really low energy. And then there was a few other colors in between. And then after a month, I took all of those daily reviews, I put them out on the floor, and I looked for patterns in terms of when I was feeling what. I learned that Tuesdays and Thursdays, I had a giant red block right after lunch. I didn't like my Tuesday, Thursday afternoons, but I always had a yellow block Monday, Wednesday, and Friday afternoons. And I realized it's because Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I would have lunch with my roommate and I would have some human interaction in the middle of the day. Tuesdays and Thursdays, I'd be studying solo all day, and my energy would start depleting fast by mid-afternoon. You might notice patterns socially. You might notice patterns with exercise. You might notice patterns in how much you sleep, or what you're eating, or who you're spending your time with. But using introverted sensing to stay mindful of what you're feeling and thinking when, and then finding patterns within that is gonna help you figure out how you could tweak and optimize your schedule in order to give yourself more of what you need and less of what you don't. All you have to do is check in with yourself once a day. Put an alarm on your phone to remind yourself to do it. And you might even find that after a while, it feels really nice because you're really taking yourself and your emotional experiences seriously, and you're showing up for yourself in a better and healthier way by developing an awareness of how you do that in the first place. Okay, the last tool for introverted sensing is one that we again talked a little bit about in my last ENFP video, but I really suggest this for anyone who is feeling kind of an overwhelming sense of depression or inability to work or inability to focus or get excited about anything or start anything. Because often when we're in that place as ENFPs, it's because we have gotten so used to inaction that we are in a downward spiral, okay? So our brain activity is not oriented towards action, it's not oriented towards learning or explanation or growth. We're just kind of stuck in this cycle of thinking negative thoughts, taking negative actions, not showing up for ourselves, and that absolutely perpetuates more depression and angst and stress. And I don't want you to feel ashamed or embarrassed if you're here. Oh dear God, I've spent so much of my life here. But I think we actually really overestimate how difficult it would be to start an upward spiral. It's often not as hard as we think. So if you're in a place where you're really feeling like motivation is almost impossible for you, producing anything is almost impossible for you, what you need to do is just start by building micro accountability with yourself. So pick one very small thing you want to do every day. It could be meditating 1 minute a day. It could be walking for 5 minutes every morning. It could be brushing your teeth first thing in the morning. And just show up for yourself in one small way every single day for a week and start building that sense of micro accountability, of knowing I will do what I said I'd do just because I said I'd do it, and so I can trust myself. The more you begin to trust yourself, to show up for yourself, to complete the small goals that you set up for yourself, the more and more you're gonna start trusting yourself, getting that little hit of dopamine when you complete your goal, however small. And I really, really do encourage you to start small. And once you get that hit of dopamine, again, that's that neurotransmitter that causes you to seek more environmental rewards, right? So you do one thing you said you'd do and your brain goes, that felt pretty good. I wonder what else I could do. But you have to take that first little step that sets you moving in that direction. And using introverted sensing to set those tiny goals and to make tiny, tiny, tiny progress towards them every day is gonna be the function that ultimately helps you get back in motion. All right, my camera battery is on the brink of collapse, and I think that's all I have to say for today. But as always, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Let me know any productivity tools that work for you, because seriously, the best piece of advice I ever got personally came from another ENFP on the internet whose real name I don't even know. And if you are looking for a program that kind of whips you back into shape, gets some natural energy flowing back into your life, I do run 6-week ENFP Soul Bootcamp programs that are designed to help you get back in touch with yourself and start showing up in an authentic and engaged way in the world. And a lot of that has to do with lifestyle design and productivity. So you can find that bootcamp on my website at www.heidipriebe.com. The link is in the description to this video. And until next time, I love you guys. Thanks so much for watching this video, and I will see you next time.